The HH-60M Blackhawk, codenamed Phoenix 1, rattled with a primal fury. Inside the cockpit, Captain Lena Petrov's hands gripped the cyclic, her knuckles bone-white against the worn leather. Outside, the world had dissolved into a maelstrom of ochre dust and howling wind. Sand, thick and abrasive as pumice, hammered against the canopy glass, threatening to peel back the layers of protective laminate. A high-pitched alarm shrieked, a rotor stability warning, and the bird shuddered violently, a sick, metallic groan echoing through the airframe. The radio, a lifeline she had clung to for a decade, spat nothing but a cacophony of static and broken syllables. Command, stand down, zero visibility, negative launch. The ghost of an order, the ghost of a voice she knew but couldn't place. Just moments ago, she had been standing in the stark fluorescent glare of the Command Ops Center at Forward Operating Base Falcon. A senior officer, his face grim and his tone colder than the air-conditioned room, had laid out the threat matrix. Red Zone Hydra, confirmed sniper activity on the ridges, no air assets until green light. The words were a death sentence for the 4 special operations soldiers of the Phoenix team, trapped and wounded somewhere in a rocky canyon known as the Jackal's Jaw. But Lena knew what a green light meant in this kind of weather. It meant waiting until all the heat signatures had faded. It meant a quiet, mournful return in the morning. And as she had walked out of that briefing, she knew that some orders are not meant to be obeyed. They are meant to be broken. The Black Hawk lurched again, a gut-wrenching drop that sent a spray of coffee from her co-pilot, Yuzbashi Marcus Thorne's mug. Altitude, he shouted, his voice tight. We're burning a hole in the air. His words were swallowed by the shriek of the wind. Below them, somewhere in the blinding storm, 4 people waited, and somewhere else, hidden by the same storm, was the voice she heard on the radio, a ghost who seemed to know her, a whisper that had promised a single rescue bird. The dust cleared for a fleeting second, just enough for her to see a flash of light, a signal flare, but not purple. It was a brilliant, defiant gold, a color that didn't belong to any known protocol, a challenge. The wind picked up, a furious, suffocating wall of sand and rock. The radio came to life for a single crisp second. A voice, familiar but strained, cut through the static. Phoenix, there's only one way out. The desert doesn't forget. Then the silence returned, heavier this time, a thick, suffocating blanket of isolation. The air grew still, but the danger hadn't passed. It had just moved closer. The HH-60M sat motionless on the tarmac, its rotors dormant, the metallic glare of the late afternoon sun filtering through the cockpit. The heat shimmered up from the ground in long, wavering lines, a testament to the oppressive, unforgiving landscape of the Forward Operating Base Falcon. Inside, the quiet was broken only by the low murmur of background radio traffic bleeding through her headset. Lena's flight gloves hung loose from her belt, untouched. Her helmet sat on the console beside her, the chin strap twisted, still bearing the scuff from a mission 2 months ago. That last mission had been clean on paper, dust off called, bird prepped, launch code cleared. But by the time they hit the ridge, the comms were garbled, and the fire team had already bled out. 3 lost. Lena had flown the same route back in silence, the weight of a mission she couldn't save settling into the bones of her very being. She hadn't spoken about it since. The memory was a phantom limb, always there, a dull ache, just beneath the surface. Now a faint voice crackled through the ops frequency, blurred at the edges by static and distance. It was a relay from a ground team codenamed Phoenix. 4 personnel wounded, pinned behind rock on the south slope of a canyon known as the Jackal's Jaw. They'd popped smoke and were waiting. The call was short. A broken, breathless voice muttered something about visibility. Then silence. The ops controller's response came in clearer. Echo is red. Multiple confirmed threats in grid. No launch authorization. Hold air assets until further notice. Another voice followed. Tight and clipped. Repeat. Red airspace. No launch. Lena reached forward and adjusted a single dial. Not because it needed adjustment, but because she couldn't sit still anymore. Her eyes tracked the shimmer rising from the flight line, then drifted toward the perimeter fence, where two other Blackhawks sat baking in the light. They weren't moving either. The co-pilot seat beside her remained empty. The others were in the briefing room, probably halfway through a dry sandwich and a weather packet. She didn't need to hear the latest threat matrix to understand what red zone meant. She already knew what it felt like to arrive late. The sky outside was flat and burning. Somewhere in the haze beyond the hills, a plume of smoke, a brilliant golden color, curled into that air. 4 people still alive had pulled the pins and waited. Lena hadn't seen their faces. She didn't need to. The image of the one she hadn't reached was enough. Their outlines had never really left the inside of her canopy. The tactical map glowed dull red beneath the overhead fluorescence of the op center. Thick zones had been marked across the grid with wide transparent overlays, one of them centered over the Jackal's Jaw. An operations officer pointed with the edge of a capped pen, outlining the threat perimeter. Sniper activity confirmed on the north ridge. No air cover in place. Sector remains red. No change in status. Captain Lena Petrov stood off to the side, her flight gloves tucked into her belt, arms crossed without tension. The ops room was cool but stale, like every sealed briefing space forward of the line. Her crew was scattered across the back row, eyes shifting between the monitors and the paper notes handed out at the door. No one spoke. The analyst continued, his voice low. Phoenix team lit a signal 35 minutes ago. Audio transmission confirms 4 personnel, all wounded. No KIA at last. Contact, but with no air clearance and Overwatch grounded due to visibility. That zone is a trap. We wait until green light. Captain Marcus Thorne, a younger co-pilot who had flown only a handful of live missions, looked toward Lena. He hadn't yet needed to face a choice like this. "Is anyone else spinning up?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The commander standing near the corner of the table answered, "Negative. All rotary assets holding until confirmation of neutralized threat." He paused, glanced toward the status board, then added, "Might be a recovery mission. Depends on if we can clean the canyon." "Depends," Marcus repeated, the word hanging in the stale air. No one followed up. Lena moved without announcement. She walked out of the room, bypassing the wall-mounted comms panel and stepping into the flight prep corridor. The bay doors were propped open, heat pushing inward from the flight line. She didn't check the mission board. The checklists taped beside her aircraft's berth were still flapping in the air. One had her signature halfway down, a small personal mark. She hadn't finished it earlier. She didn't finish it now. Uchish Muhendisi Bashjavush Avachen was already heading her way with a loadout sheet rolled in one hand. She didn't say anything. She just handed it over and began walking toward the aircraft without waiting for confirmation. She'd been flying long enough to understand when a mission existed outside the margins. Marcus appeared behind her, uncertain, but still following. "They said it's red," he said. Lena didn't stop walking. "They did. We'll be out of support range the second we drop into the valley," he added, with more insistence. She reached the bird and began the walk around, trailing her hand along the skid mount, checking without pausing. "Then we won't stay long." The refueling crew saw them moving and began prepping the pit station. No one asked for a manifest. Lena climbed into the cockpit without checking behind her. In the crew bay, Ava adjusted the seating brackets to prep for casualty lift. She worked quietly. Lena could hear the click of the seat pins, locking. Marcus climbed into the right seat beside her and pulled the door shut. She powered up the avionics, hand steady on the master switch. The system came alive in a clean, familiar rhythm, just like it had every time before. Warnings cleared one by one. Marcus spoke again, more quietly this time. "You sure they're still out there?" The instrument panel reflected back in her visor. She didn't look at him. "They threw a gold smoke 35 minutes ago. That means they were still breathing." They said, "Wait for green." Marcus's voice held a desperate plea. Lena adjusted the throttle. "Then they'll be late." Outside the bird, the ground crew had pulled clear. The rotors began to turn. At first slow, then building a low, resonant rumble. The wash kicked up dust from the tarmac, sending it swirling in a widening circle. Another helicopter stood idle 10 meters away, fully fueled, unmanned. Its doors were sealed. The comms snapped from base channel to open air. Lena leaned forward into her harness and watched the RPM rise toward takeoff threshold. The sound of the engines built in layered resonance, low at first, then rising as the blades caught full torque. The ground blurred beneath them. Ava sat in the rear bay and locked in the straps beside the ramp. She didn't speak. Neither did the gunner. There was nothing to ask. Lena lifted the bird into hover. The dust pulled outward in a widening circle. "They're still warm," she said, so low it barely registered in the mic. But Marcus heard her. So did the others. The HH-60M turned its nose toward the canyon. The mission clock had not been started. It didn't matter. They were going in anyway. The canyon drew up around them like a stone throat, narrowing with every kilometer flown. The HH-60M cut low across the terrain, its blades folding the air close enough to drag sand off the ridgelines. The terrain masking worked both ways. They couldn't see the snipers, but the snipers couldn't get full eyes on them either. Not yet. Inside the cockpit, the air was dry and loud. Not from engine noise, but from the pressure of every system running at peak efficiency. The HUD blinked occasional caution prompts, rotor clearance, temperature fluctuation, one terrain proximity warning. She cleared it without looking. Everything was within spec, but barely. The radio had gone quiet since they broke line with the forward base. No overwatch, no drones, no updates. Just the pulse of engine hum and the low tones of navigation relays, feeding altitude and grid lines as they dropped deeper into the wash. Lena flew by visual edge and map memory. The Phoenix team's last known position had been triangulated to a narrow basin with only one safe angle for ingress. A sudden pop echoed through the canyon, sharp, distant, but unmistakable. Marcus stiffened in the right seat. The sound had come from the far ridge, a single shot. No follow-up. They pushed on. The bird shifted left as she took a longer bank around an exposed bend. Every new angle was a new risk. She knew that, as they rounded the last contour before the basin, a sand-colored blur hit the windshield. It struck high, just above center line, cracking outward in a spiderweb that distorted the sky. The round didn't penetrate. A stress fracture rippled down toward the cockpit glare shield. The aircraft didn't shake, but Marcus's breath hitched in the headset channel. Lena said nothing. She tapped the side display once to reset the warning stack, and kept the nose level. The gunner leaned out slightly. "Ridge has glass on us," he said flatly. Single point, no follow-up. Lena gave the bird 1 degree of left yaw and dropped 3 meters lower. The walls of the canyon closed in tighter, and the light changed to a dull amber haze. Ground altitude fed through in short bursts. On the display, margin shallow. She rode the line anyway. Irita's signature. Then finally, The signal. A brilliant golden smoke. It rose slowly at first, caught in a dead air pocket between outcroppings. Then the wind curled it sideways, dragging the plume into a short, vivid streak. It came from a basin no wider than a parking lot. No movement yet, just the color. Smoke confirmed. Ava called from the back. That's them. Lena's eyes scanned the slope lines and the impact zones. No terrain overhead, she said. But we're landing blind. No cover. Ava checked her gear. Copy. Ramp on touch. I'll go. The basin floor was too narrow for a full hover hold. She would have to drop fast, flare late, and let the dust blind them. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't avoidable. Lena keyed into crew channel. When we hit the wash, we land blind. You get out. You find them. Marcus opened his mouth, thought better of it, and closed it again. He started checking instruments more aggressively instead. Lena watched the RPM hold. Wind shift minor. Visibility dropping. The HH-60M cleared the final ridge and rolled into descent. She nosed it down. Skids angled slightly to meet the rise in terrain. The smoke blew backward toward the bird, smearing across the windshield and disappearing into the fractured edge of the spider crack. The gunner dropped into position. Ava shifted to the edge of the ramp, half crouched, harness rigged. The ground vanished in a sheet of dust. Visibility went to 0. They dropped into it anyway. The bird disappeared into the brownout. Rotor wash kicking up a full envelope of sand and grit that erased the canyon floor. There was no more terrain reference, no more visual lock, just feel. The altimeter rolled down. Lena adjusted torque by instinct. Her knuckles never whitened. Her breath never changed. 1 second passed, then 2, then 5. The HH-60M hovered 6 feet above the LZ. The ramp dropped. The only sound was the beat of the blades and the dust beating back against the fuselage. Lena waited. No one had eyes on the team yet, but they had landed. The moment the ramp hit dirt, the brownout swallowed everything. Dust poured into the cabin, curling up over the side panels and flooding across the floor. The bird hung steady, rotors pumping a roar into the tight canyon, the air vibrating with force and grit. Lena held the stick low, heels flat, hands balanced. No visual, no terrain lock, just the instruments and the feel of weight distribution on the skids. A crack echoed down the canyon, sharp and flat. Another sniper round. It hit somewhere left of the nose, close enough to jolt the canopy. The fractured glass above Marcus's head stretched another inch across. Still no breach. Contact, he said, voice tight. Left ridge. We are being ranged. Lena adjusted collective, just enough to maintain hover, shifting torque to keep the nose aligned. She didn't flinch. Ramp still down, she said. We hold. More dust entered, carrying grit and fragments of burned vegetation. A boot appeared at the edge of the ramp, dragging a limp body behind it. Ava stumbled into the bay, face streaked with dirt. She dropped to one knee and pulled the first soldier inside. The man was unconscious. His uniform was torn at the leg and shoulder. Ava pulled him clear and went back out without a word. Seconds passed. No voices on the crew channel. Just the pulse of the engine, the rattle of the airframe fighting lift, and the dust hammering against the skin of the bird. We've got to lift, Lena. We can't see anything. Marcus's voice was strained. We will when they're in. They're calling our location, he snapped, pointing toward the front glass. They have an angle on us. If they line up the rotors, not yet. The second body came in rougher than the first. The gunner was half carrying, half dragging. The soldier's right arm was limp and bloodied. Ava caught the other arm, and together they heaved him in. The soldier groaned once, then fell silent. The cabin stank of sweat, sand, and something else, metallic and sharp. The gunner stayed inside this time, "Where's 4?" he asked. Ava didn't answer. She turned and dropped back into the wash. Another shot rang out closer. It struck the lower fuselage and echoed through the frame. Lena adjusted throttle again, brought the hover up half a foot. She didn't break contact with the control. Every limb stayed exactly where it needed to be. "This is it, Lena. We have to go. We're going to lose this bird." "We're not done. They're probably gone," Marcus said, his eyes wild now. "It's been too long." She didn't look at him. If they were gone, she wouldn't be out there. The third and fourth bodies were dragged in. One, a young woman, her face streaked with tears and dirt. The other, a larger man with a limp. Ava and the gunner worked fast, getting them secured. "Ramps clear," the gunner shouted. Lena didn't wait. She pulled the bird into lift. Slow and deliberate, dust chased them upward, then thinned as they cleared the basin. The canyon walls closed in fast. She angled left, banking tight to avoid the ridge. The tail rotor came within 2 meters of the cliff face. 2 meters, 1.51. Marcus called out, breathless. The bird cleared. Back at forward operating base Falcon, the sun had dropped closer to the horizon, casting long shadows across the flight line. The HH-60M sat motionless in the far corner of the hangar, its windshield still spidered from the impact. Scorch marks blackened the left intake cowling. The lower fuselage bore a new dent just forward of the ramp, barely visible unless you were looking for it. Lena walked into the main office building. No one saluted. No one called her name. Inside the debriefing room, 2 officers waited behind a plain table. One of them, a colonel, didn't look up from the paper he was reviewing as she entered. The other nodded once, gesturing to the chair. Lena sat, posture relaxed, but attentive. The colonel finally looked at her. His voice was calm, even clipped. "Captain Petrov, your aircraft was observed entering restricted airspace without clearance. You landed inside a red zone during active threat status. That constitutes unauthorized deviation from standing orders. Do you dispute any of that?" Lena met his eyes. "No, sir," the major continued. "You extracted 4 wounded personnel. We've confirmed their status. 2 are stable, 2 are still under critical observation." He tapped the sheet once. "We're not making a determination yet. There will be a review process, possibly a board. Until then, you're to remain on standby." The major paused before speaking again. "You made a choice, Captain, one that exceeded your authority." Lena didn't shift in her seat. Her voice, when it came, was even. There was no one else coming. Neither man responded. The colonel closed the folder. The session was over. Lena stood and exited without another word. She walked past the medical tent. A field nurse held the flap open for her. Inside, arranged in a quiet row, were 4 gurneys. 3 were covered in light blankets, IVs running slow drips. The 4th held a soldier, propped at an angle. His eyes were open. He looked at her. There was no smile, no salute, no words, just a small nod. A single brief tilt of the head. It was the woman from the Phoenix team, the one who had sent the gold smoke flare, the one who had whispered the warning on the radio. Her mouth moved, soundless, shaping a single word: Phoenix. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Lena returned it with a nod of her own, barely more than a blink, then turned and walked on. At the edge of the ramp, Ava and Marcus stood beside a cart of tools, inspecting the HH-60M. No one spoke. Lena looked once through the fractured windshield. The glass held the same damage it had when they landed, a mark of the thing they had done, and survived. She climbed the ramp, stepped into the cabin, and crouched briefly beside the seat mount where one of the wounded had been laid. A stain had dried along the floor panel, dark and jagged. Someone had already tried to scrub it out. Not all of it had come clean. Lena unclipped her gloves and rested them on the seat for a moment, then picked them up again. There was no announcement, no celebration, just a cooling aircraft, a battered interior, and the certainty of 4 people still breathing. The cost wasn't listed anywhere. It didn't need to be. She stepped down from the bird, boots scraping the ramp edge, and walked back across the hangar floor as the light shifted 1 degree warmer and the silence held. The night had settled in thick and wide across the airfield. The hangars stood with their mouths open, lights dim. Lena sat on the rear ramp, elbows resting loosely on her knees, gloves folded beside her. Her team eventually joined her, sitting in silence, watching the empty runway. The Phoenix had landed, and its legacy was not in the cheers, but in the quiet, bruised silence of a job done when no one else would do it. They are filled with the ghosts of sound, the echoes of rounds fired, the strange shouts on the comms, the whine of a gearbox under too much stress. For Lena, the hangar was full of them. She sat on the rear ramp of the HH-60M, elbows resting loosely on her knees, the silence pressing in. The bay doors remained open behind her, and the cabin lights had been switched off. A single faint glow from the flight instruments pulsing in the dark. The tick of cooling metal came at uneven intervals, each one different from the last, like the aircraft was breathing out the last heat of the day. Her boots touched the edge of the ramp, heels angled downward toward the concrete. She didn't swing them, didn't move much at all. The back of her flight suit still bore the crease from the harness. She hadn't changed. Behind her, the cabin smelled like it always did after something hard, oil and a trace of sweat that no amount of scrubbing ever fully removed. She was a ghost in a hangar of ghosts. Footsteps came slowly, steady across the concrete. Lena didn't turn. She knew the sound. Ava and Marcus appeared just off her left shoulder, then eased themselves down beside her without saying a word. Ava wore the same undershirt she'd been in all day, a stain on one sleeve and dust, still clinging to the back collar. She looked out at the runway the same way Lena did, without urgency, without comment. Just there, Marcus sat cross-legged on the ramp, a few feet lower than the others. He offered a thermos to Lena, who took it without looking. The coffee inside was warm, a small comfort against the vast coldness of the night. No one sipped it right away. The 3 of them faced the empty flight line like it held something worth watching. The aircraft had been patched already. Maintenance crews had sealed the visible damage, refueled it, and logged it back into rotation, but the windshield hadn't been replaced. The spiderweb crack still held the same shape, reflecting the distant perimeter lights in thin, broken lines. The ramp hadn't been raised either. Lena hadn't told anyone to close it. The debriefing room was a vacuum of cool, artificial air. Lena sat across a polished table from a full colonel and a major, both in immaculately pressed uniform. The major held her flight log, his fingers tracing the timestamp of her unauthorized departure. Captain Petrov. The major began, his tone neutral, clinical. Your log shows you took off at 17:34, 6 minutes after command issued a full red zone alert. Can you explain this deviation? Lena met his gaze without flinching. No explanation, sir. It was a choice. The colonel interjected, his voice a low hum. You're aware that this puts the entire squadron at risk. It's a breach of protocol that can't be overlooked. Your crew, your aircraft, they were all in harm's way because you made an unsanctioned decision. Lena leaned forward slightly, her voice even. With respect, sir. They were already in harm's way. The men on the ground, that's what a red zone means. It's not a designation. It's a diagnosis. The major's expression didn't change. We have reports of a second sniper round. Confirmed impact on your bird's fuselage. That's a direct threat to the mission and crew. Lena's gaze held steady. That was a consequence of the mission, not a cause of failure. The threat was already there. My job was to negate it, not to wait for it to pass. The colonel leaned back in his chair, a faint sigh escaping his lips. You could have lost your life. Your crew could have lost their lives for a mission that was already deemed a recovery. Sir, Lena said, her voice dropping, a quiet strength that filled the room. The last time a mission was deemed a recovery, 3 good men never came home. I wasn't going to let that happen again. The colonel's eyes narrowed, a flash of something unreadable passing through them. The major closed the folder and set it aside. The session was over. The verdict, unspoken, hung in the sterile air. Lena stood and exited without another word. She walked past the medical tent where the air conditioning units hummed against canvas walls. A field nurse stepped out and held the flap open for her. Inside, arranged in a quiet row, were 4 gurneys. 3 were covered in light blankets, IVs running slow drips. The 4th held a soldier upright, propped at an angle. His eyes were open. He looked at her. There was no smile, no salute, just a small nod. It was the woman from the Phoenix team, the one who had sent the gold smoke flare. Her mouth moved, soundless, shaping a single word. Phoenix. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Lena returned it with a nod of her own, barely more than a blink, then turned and walked on. At the edge of the ramp, Ava and Marcus stood beside a cart of tools. No one spoke. Lena looked once through the fractured windshield. The glass held the same damage it had when they landed, a mark of the thing they had done and survived. She stepped into the cabin and crouched briefly beside the seat mount where one of the wounded had been laid. A stain had dried along the floor panel, dark and jagged. Someone had already tried to scrub it out. Not all of it had come clean. Lena unclipped her gloves and rested them on the seat for a moment, then picked them up again. There was no announcement, no celebration, just a cooling aircraft, a battered interior, and the certainty of 4 people still breathing. The cost wasn't listed anywhere. It didn't need to be. She stepped down from the bird, boots scraping the ramp edge, and walked back across the hangar floor as the light shifted 1 degree warmer and the silence held. The night had settled in thick and wide across the airfield. The hangars stood with their mouths open, lights dim. Lena sat on the rear ramp of the HH-60M. A few minutes later, the wounded woman from the Phoenix team, a name tag on her gurney that read Sergeant Miller, was wheeled out. As the gurney passed, Sergeant Miller met Lena's eyes again, a glint of defiance and gratitude in her gaze. "The desert doesn't forget," she mouthed, her voice a silent whisper, carried on the night air. Lena nodded, a promise passed between them without a single word. She would not forget either. The Phoenix had landed, its legacy not in cheers, but in the quiet, bruised silence of a job done when no one else would do it. And if you want more stories like this, quiet, grounded and true, follow along. Sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that never need to raise themselves.